The investigators looked shaken, what they saw and what had been done to the children.
It was very shocking to see a doll with the exact same bondage from...
If he kept going, we would eventually catch him.
His gamesmanship was just, I think he really wanted to get caught.
What made you so sick, you son of a bitch?
Dennis Rader is a monster.
I looked and saw my mom laying on the bed. She was beat up. My dad had a belt around his neck. You could smell the death. You could smell the fear. You could smell to this day, I can smell fear. My heart just broke. It felt like somebody had ripped my chest wide open and pulled my heart out.
This was America's most successful serial killer, spreading fear in Wichita and Park City, Kansas for 31 years. His reign of terror started in 1974 and didn't end until 1991. His first victims were the Otero family. It was a cold day, January 15, 1974. The three surviving children of Joseph and Julie Otero came home from school. They walked into their house only to find a nightmare waiting for them. Their parents and two siblings, Josephine, who was just 11, and Joseph II, who was only 9, were dead. The horrific scene marked the beginning of a terrifying era in their quiet community. Next, let's take a step back and see how it all began. It was 1974. The Otero family had just moved to Wichita, Kansas. Joseph Otero, a military man full of life, and his wife Julia, a loving mother, were doing their best to create a bright future for their 5 children. But before the tragedy, Joseph Otero sensed something was off. He noticed some strange things happening around their house. One time, the power went out unexpectedly. Joseph didn't take any chances. He made his family hide in a closet while he checked to see if the whole neighborhood was in the dark too. Another strange thing happened when a man came to their house saying he was a telephone repairman. Joseph was cautious. He told his son to look out the window and make sure there was a company van parked outside before he opened the door. These moments of suspicion showed that Joseph had a feeling something was wrong, but he never imagined the horror that would soon strike his family. So, after all those strange occurrences, the morning of January 15, 1974 arrived. On that day, the killer cut the phone lines and sneaked into the Otero house when Joey opened the back door to let the family dog out. The killer forced the family to lie down on the living room floor at gunpoint. Then, he moved them into a bedroom and tied them up with rope he had brought with him. Joseph and Joey lay on the floor, while Julie and Josie were on the bed. He restrained the wrists and feet of Joseph and Julie. The killer put a plastic bag over Joseph's head and secured it with ropes. Joseph tried to chew a hole in the bag, but the killer tightened another bag over his head, making Joseph suffocate slowly. The killer then tried to strangle Julie, but she woke up in the middle of it. She was very upset and begged the killer to save her son. She said, "You killed my boy! You killed my boy!" After realizing what had happened, she whispered, "God have mercy on your soul," before the killer strangled her to death with a rope. With both parents dead, the killer put another plastic bag over Joey's head, adding 2 t-shirts and another bag. Joey struggled as he suffocated. After that, the killer took Josie down to the basement, hung her with a noose from a pipe, and left her there. The police later found the killer's semen near her partially clothed body. Now, you might wonder how Charlie Otero survived. That day, he had gone to school early for a test. It had been snowing, and he asked his dad to take him to school early so he could attend an early study hall. Danny and Carmen, his younger siblings, had to go with him because they were also riding with their dad.
In January of 1974, I was 15 years old. It had been snowing. It was a day of testing for school. I asked my dad to take me to school early that day so that I could get to that early study hall. And Danny and Carmen had to go with me because they were riding with him also.
After school ended, Charlie walked home with Danny and Carmen, eager to share his perfect test score with their mom and dad. As they got closer to the house, Charlie noticed the backyard gate was open. He felt something was wrong. When he entered his house, Charlie saw what has changed his life.
So I ran back down the hall. I looked and saw my mom laying on the bed. She was beat up. My dad had a belt around his neck. You could smell the death. You could smell the fear. You could smell to this day, I can smell fear. My heart just broke. It felt like somebody had ripped my chest wide open and pulled my heart out.
So, after Charlie found his parents, he asked his younger brother to call the police, but the phone line was cut. Charlie quickly took his siblings out of the house and begged a neighbor to help. When the police entered the house, they found 9-year-old Joey Jr. in his room. He was bound with a bag over his face. As they continued to search, a cop went into the basement. He bumped into what he thought was a punching bag. When he turned on the light, he realized it was actually 11-year-old Josephine hanging from a pipe. The police were shaken by what they found. The terrible things done to the children shocked everyone. This family was just like any other. No one could understand why they were chosen for this horrible crime. Most people thought it was related to drugs. The police believed it was a one-time thing, but they were wrong.
The investigators looked shaken. What they saw and what had been done to the children, that would shake anybody.
This was an average, normal, nuclear family. Nobody could fathom exactly why they were selected for this crime.
Most people at that time thought it was a drug deal. We thought it was a one-off, a one-time deal. We were wrong.
So, after that terrible discovery, the police did everything they could to find the killer, but they didn't get any clues. Then, in December 1977, they received a letter from the killer himself. In the letter, the killer talked about his urges and called his dark side the monster. He wrote, "I'm sorry this happened to society. It's hard for me to control myself. You probably call me psychotic with a sexual perversion hang-up. Where this monster enters my brain, I will never know, but it's here to stay. How does one cure himself? If you ask for help and say you've killed 4 people, they will laugh or hit the panic button and call the cops. I can't stop it, so the monster goes on and hurts me as well as society. Maybe you can stop him. I can't. Good luck hunting." Like he actually teases the cops to catch him. At the end of the letter, the killer introduced himself as the BTK Killer, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. He wrote, "P.S. Since sex criminals do not change their MO, or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code word for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You see, he's at it again."
At the end of the letter, he mentioned that the code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. He indicated that he was a serial killer to be and threatened to continue to kill.
The letter shocked everyone and cemented the killer's terrifying image in the public eye. The police now knew they were dealing with someone who had no intention of stopping.
It is without doubt the most unusual case we've ever had here in Wichita.
So, after that chilling letter, the BTK Killer struck again a few months later. On April 4th, 1974, just 2 miles from where Charlie used to live, a 19-year-old man ran down the street with blood on his face. He was shot in the head, but he still managed to run as fast as he could. He caught the attention of a few passers-by and begged them to call the police. He said, "Please help my sister. Someone broke into our house and she's still there." When the police arrived at the boy's home, they found 21-year-old Catherine Bright tied up with nylon stockings. She begged the officers to remove the bindings because she couldn't breathe. She had been stabbed several times. They rushed her to the hospital, but she died.
We noticed that the nylon stockings were tied with square knots, such as had been seen at the Otero crime scene.
In both crime scenes, the telephone line was cut prior to entry.
That wasn't enough to actually connect those two cases.
On that day, in their apartment, the same serial killer killed Catherine Bright by stabbing and strangling her. He also tried to kill her brother, Kevin. Kevin was shot twice but survived.
He tied me up, had me tie my sister up, and he separated us in separate bedrooms. And he came back in and was going to strangle me to death. And I broke loose the bonds he had me tied up with and jumped up and fought him for the gun. He jerked it away from me, and then he shot me the first time in the head, and I went down, and then he thought I was dead.
He described the killer as an average-sized guy with a bushy mustache and psychotic eyes. With Kevin's help, the police made a composite sketch of the killer. They shared the sketch with every news outlet in Kansas. Everyone started looking for someone who matched the description. Thousands of tips came in, but none led to a solid clue. So, after the attack on Catherine Bright, the BTK killer struck again. But before that, in October 1974, 6 months after the Otero murders, the police finally made an arrest. A young man confessed that he killed the Otero family with 2 friends. This news brought relief to everyone when the local papers reported it. However, shortly after, a news reporter received a call from an anonymous man. He hinted at them going to the library to find a book with evidence proving that he, not the arrested men, was the real serial killer.
The person on the other end says, go to the library, you will find a letter and an engineering book.
The letter started out with, I did this. I did it myself. I did it alone. So let's set this straight.
It shared information regarding the crime scene that only someone who had been in there would know about. Josephine, position, hanging by the neck in the northwest part of the basement, hand-tied with bind cord, noose with 4 or 5 turns.
He wasn't remorseful about the Otero homicide. Somebody else was stealing his thunder, and he wasn't going to stand for it.
At the end of the letter, he mentioned that the code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK.
He indicated that he was a serial killer to be and threatened to continue to kill.
The police could not trace the author of the letter, and the man who called himself BTK disappeared. For the rest of 1974, then all through 1975 and 1976, no one heard a word from the killer. Everyone in Wichita lived in fear. However, some time ago, he struck again. This time, it was March 17, 1977. The police got a call from a man who said a boy knocked on his door and told him someone had killed his mother.
About 15 minutes later, come knocking on our door. Opened it. There stood the same man. He pushed me out of the way, proceeded to come on in, pulled down the blind, turned off TV, reaches under, pulls out a gun. Well, from that point, he locked us in the bathroom, put his kids in there, put a blanket, a couple toys in there. Pushed the bed against the other door. There was a crack in the door, just enough where you can see out. I was looking through the door. Seen her tape her hands and her feet behind her back. And plastic bag over her head. Rope tied around her neck. Laying face down. He left. I was ramming the bathroom door. I finally broke a hole in it. We got out. I ran around to Mom. Just a second. It's a image burned in my brain.
When the police arrived at the boy's home, they found a woman lying dead in her bed. The unfortunate woman was Shirley Vian. She was a single mother with 3 children. Her son, 5-year-old Steve, was the one who called for help. It seemed he had witnessed his mother's murder. Steve told the police what happened. He saw a man holding a picture of his mom and his brother. The man was the serial killer. He had followed Steve home and forced his way inside. Then, right in front of Steve's eyes, he killed his mom. The police then had 3 homicide cases: the Oteros, Catherine Bright, and Shirley Vian. BTK had become the serial killer he promised to be. So, after that terrible day in March 1977, the police received another call. This time, it was about 8:20. The caller hung up before saying much. When the officers arrived, they found another young woman, a victim of homicide. The murders in Wichita were happening close together, making everyone within a few miles scared for their lives. But those who survived knew what kind of monster BTK really was. People like Charlie Otero, Kevin Bright, and Steve Relford lived with the horror. Steve, like Charlie, had a troubled life. By 2004, there had been no news of the serial killer for over 12 years. Charlie had hit rock bottom. He was in jail, serving time for domestic violence for the last 4 years. He knew his parents would be ashamed of him. His 16-year-old son visited him sometimes, but it only broke Charlie's heart. Up until 2004, no one knew what happened to the serial killer. He had literally taken a break. The media started doing stories on the 30th anniversary of BTK's first murder. A Wichita newspaper mentioned that someone was writing a book about the BTK case. BTK didn't like that at all. He didn't like someone else writing his story and getting publicity for the murders he committed. So he contacted the police again.
He did not like that there was someone else writing his story. There was someone else getting publicity for the murders that he wanted credit for.
In this letter, BTK included Vicky Weggerl's driver's license, which investigators never found, and some shocking pictures. The return address on the letter read Bill Thomas Killman, BTK. Over the following months, BTK sent more letters, puzzles, and even a plastic doll wrapped in bandage, just like his victims. Investigators shared more facts about the case with the news, giving BTK the publicity he craved while trying to appeal to his ego. The letters and the clues kept coming, and the police hoped to finally catch the killer who haunted Wichita for so long.
It was very shocking to see a doll with the exact same bondage from 30 years before.
As the FBI told us early in this investigation, if you can keep him communicating, he will make a mistake.
The following facts about BTK are being made available to the public in hopes of identifying BTK.
So, after the BTK killer sent those unsettling letters, the police received 5 more communications from him between March 2004 and January 2005. On January 25th, the investigation took a shocking turn. The latest letter was found in a cereal box left at a Home Depot parking lot.
If he kept going, we would eventually catch him.
His gamesmanship was just, I think he really wanted to get caught.
Everybody in the department, I'm sure to some extent, hoped to be the one to find that magic bullet that would find him.
He was doing things that were stupid, and law enforcement were gaining a lot of perspective into this individual.
Inside, the killer wrote to the police, saying he wanted to change his way of communicating. He asked, "Can you trace a floppy disk? Please be honest."
BTK asked police, "Can you trace a floppy disk? Please be honest."
This guy thought that we wouldn't lie to him because we were enjoying things as much as he was.
Well, law enforcement was not honest.
They say, no, it cannot be traced.
The police needed to respond carefully. They decided to post a message through the classified ads, telling him they couldn't trace a floppy disk. If this was a trick, BTK could disappear forever. But this time, the police had something they didn't have 30 years earlier: video surveillance from the Home Depot parking lot. The quality was poor, so they couldn't see the man's face, but they noticed something important. Just days after, a floppy disk arrived at the Wichita Police Department from BTK. Forensics analyzed the disk right away. Within moments, they found the software registration for a user named Dennis and an organization named Christ Lutheran Church. In the days that followed, the police worked with experts to decode the floppy disk. They knew BTK was smart, but they also knew technology had advanced. As they examined the disk, they found a hidden clue in the metadata. It linked the disk to a computer at Christ Lutheran Church. With this new lead, the police started looking into the church. They found out that Dennis Rader, a church leader, used the computer. Rader seemed like an ordinary man. He had a family and was well-liked in his community, but the evidence pointed to him.
I was a fairly good father and husband to my family. I worked at church, I worked at Scouts. And there's the dark side of me, secret. And that's very strong.
After getting the lead on Dennis Rader, the investigators put him under 24-hour surveillance. They wanted to build a solid case against him. They also got DNA from his first victims. This time, they had both the technology and the suspect to match it. Since the arrival of DNA technology, the police have been searching for a match to the genetic profile of the BTK killer. Now, they had the next best thing. They discovered Rader had a daughter who attended Kansas State University. They figured they could match the DNA with his daughter. On February 25, 2005, the police arrested Dennis Rader on his way home for lunch in Park City. As the investigators faced him, the serial killer, who had terrorized Kansas for the last 30 years, looked stunned. Many people in Wichita felt relieved by the news of his arrest, but most were shocked to learn who BTK really was. Dennis Rader was known for his role at the local church. He seemed like an ordinary, friendly man. For the families of his victims, the news was horrifying. The investigators worked hard to gather all the evidence. They needed to make sure the case against Rader was strong. They collected samples, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together the timeline of his crimes.
Charlie Byan was my mother. I'd just like for him to suffer for the rest of his life.
This man needs to be thrown in a deep, dark hole and left to rot. He should never, ever see the light of day.
They found that Rader had been careful and methodical, but he had made mistakes that led to his capture.
Yes, I was very careful with the forensics. I made sure I didn't leave my fingerprints. I wore rubber gloves, ones that you use when you're washing dishes.
He learned a lot about how police investigated crimes, which helped him to know what to do, what to avoid. That subject matter just helped him to become a better predator.
In the community, people talked about how they had never suspected Rader. He had been a regular guy, involved in church activities and neighborhood events. His neighbors were in disbelief. They couldn't reconcile the man they knew with the monster who had committed such terrible acts. For the victims' families, the arrest brought back painful memories. They had lived with the horror of their loved ones' deaths for years. Now, they had to face the reality that the killer had been living among them all this time. It was a mix of relief and anguish. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, was brought to justice. His arrest ended a long and terrifying chapter in the history of Kansas.
Today is a very historic day. The bottom line, BTK is arrested.
The story of his crimes and his capture became a lesson in the importance of vigilance, technology, and the tireless efforts of law enforcement. The community would never forget the victims, but they could find some peace knowing the killer was no longer free. Next, after his arrest in February, the police interrogated Dennis Rader. He bragged about tying a woman's hands behind her back, saying, in the bondage world, that's really high stuff. But he admitted he grew lazy in later years, killing in his own neighborhood, which he said was not good serial killer business. He mocked his victims' protests as yada yada yada. Rader told an investigator, "I'm sorry, I know this is a human being, but I'm a monster." The investigators said it felt like they were just chatting over coffee, like Rader was telling a fishing story. On June 26, 2005, Dennis Rader stood in front of a jury to begin his trial. Every surviving family member of his victims showed up in court. They wanted to make sure the monster would be put behind bars. Steve, the son of Shirley Vian, was there, and so was Charlie Otero. Charlie Otero went to court with a plan. He wanted to get his hands on Rader. He even thought about shanking him if he got the chance. But something unexpected happened.
I was going there with the idea of getting my hands on him. I was going to shank him if I could.
All right, Mr. Rader, how do you plead? Guilty.
No matter what happened to me, I didn't care. I just wanted revenge.
Constitutions of the United States and the state of Kansas provide that a person charged with a criminal case is entitled to have a jury of 12 persons, 12 of his peers.
I wanted revenge for my family. That's all I could think about.
I didn't know anything about how my family had died until he did his confession.
Well, I confronted the family, pulled a pistol, confronted Mr. Otero.
He said that my mother said that, may God forgive you for what you're doing. And it broke my heart to hear that my mom had said these things to a man while he's killing her family in front of her.
I wanted revenge. I wanted revenge for my family.
For the next 45 minutes, the courtroom was quiet as the serial killer described what happened to each of his victims. Most of them, like Charlie, heard the details for the first time. Rader spoke matter-of-factly, showing no emotion or remorse for the killings. As Rader recounted each crime, the families listened in horror. They had lived with the pain and loss for years, and now they had to hear the brutal details of how their loved ones were killed. The descriptions were cold and clinical, making the horror even more real. Charlie sat there, seething with anger and pain. He had always imagined confronting Rader, but hearing him talk so casually about the murders made it clear that Rader was beyond any human feeling. Charlie's plan to attack him seemed pointless in the face of such evil. At the end of the testimonies, Charlie was asked to make a statement on behalf of his family. He stood up, his heart heavy with sorrow and rage. Charlie spoke of his parents and siblings, of the life they had before Rader took it all away. He spoke of the years of pain and loss and of the strength it took to keep going. Families of the victims had waited a long time for justice, and now they were finally able to see justice being done. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, would finally face the consequences of his actions. The community could begin to heal, knowing the monster was no longer free. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might find it interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories and detailed investigations. Click the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Your support helps us bring you more content like this. Once again, thank you for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.